Hello and welcome to this episode of FireDEV, a fireside chat with great people in the industry. And today I have Rem Baumann, and he works at Amazon. So first of all, I just want to welcome you, Rem, for coming on the podcast.
Yeah, thanks for having me, Farhan. Great to be here.
So what did you do, or what do you do at Amazon then?
Thanks for asking. I am a optimization architect at AWS. It's a very unique role actually. I'm a part of a team called Optics, and everyone on our team is dedicated to supporting our largest customers in cost optimization and cloud financial management. Um, so we're a bit of an extension of all the account teams supporting our customers. And each and every person on our team is dedicated to either a specific industry or a specific customer on helping to optimize their workloads. So for myself, I focus on our media and entertainment customers, and I'm really looking after those customers and recommending ways for them to operate better in the cloud. And there's a lot of different ways of doing this. The most obvious way is cost optimization and helping them to save money. But operationally, there's a lot of things that go into that as well, helping them to visualize their cost and usage, create cost chargeback and showback models so that different business units can understand their costs, and just helping to really promote a cost-aware culture. Um, because when comparing to some of the more traditional on-premise development, this is definitely one of the biggest struggles that we see of people coming into the cloud. So it's mostly centered around helping those customers really grow into their own at AWS and use it most efficiently.
Okay, so you said, some of your media clients. Is that clients like Netflix, or is this something entirely different?
Yeah, we have a lot of different media and entertainment customers under our portfolio. Netflix is one that publicly uses AWS, and some of the customers that I work in, certainly a lot of streaming that goes along. Also, just some of the other content producers and event streamers that as well I support.
Okay. And so, what is the single, best thing about cloud software, as a service that makes companies like Netflix and Snapchat use platforms like AWS or Google Cloud instead of setting up their own servers and keep using them? Because, Facebook has their own servers. Obviously, they were, came about a bit before, this cloud revolution, but what's making these new big tech companies that have the money realistically to set their own tech servers, I mean their own servers up, but they're choosing not to. They're choosing to use AWS, Google Cloud, and Microsoft Azure, for example.
Yeah. There's so many different reasons. I mean, I think the most obvious is that it kind of extrapolates out a lot of the responsibilities that you would need to have running your own on-premise environment and conducting all the things that would be required in order to run your own data centers and moving that to someone else's responsibility. Obviously, within that, there's a ton of innovation that goes on within cloud. AWS has expanded to over 200 services, and each of those continually growing and growing every year. So that's a lot of innovation that other people get to take advantage of that they don't necessarily need to hire or dedicate heads to. Um, and a lot of those are managed services, so you don't need to manage the underlying patching or maintenance of a particular service. And you can very easily just start to deploy something, experiment with it, and take advantage of some of that cloud native capabilities that are already baked into a lot of the services we have.
Okay. And do you really get any big clients that do kind of a hybrid approach where they'll have a huge, cloud presence using something like, AWS, for example, and then having some sort of on-site server, which frankly, could be offloaded to a cloud platform like AWS, but they choose to do some sort of hybrid system that may be more beneficial that way instead of doing it all cloud?
Yeah, absolutely. And obviously it's something that we're attempting to move as much onto AWS and onto the cloud as possible. But we know that there are certain constraints and that won't be possible, whether it's just not worth it for them to move into the cloud, For regulatory reasons, they need to keep it residing in their own data center. And so there are a lot of offerings on AWS that are actually built around having that hybrid approach. Things like Outposts that you can deploy into your own data center, direct connections from data centers into the AWS backbone so that you can transfer data in and out more easily. It's something that AWS has definitely realized, and it's something that we help our customers to better enable them if they are taking that approach.
Okay. And do you have any clients that use some AWS but have a local a local version that you know of, just in case something either goes down at AWS or for some reason there's some falling out either due to policy or due to technical reasons and they can no longer use AWS? Do they have like some sort of local version whipped up and just ready to go just in case, but they don't use? Do you know of any clients like that?
Yeah, each kind of has their own different disaster recovery strategy, and it's interesting, the few times that there are service disruptions on AWS to see how that impacts some of our customers. Um, some will be running on multi-cloud, so they'll
Okay.
have backups on other clouds. As you mentioned, a lot of people will have things on premise, but a lot of people will also take all of that approach and build it out redundantly through different AWS regions, so that if something was to happen to a specific region of AWS, you can fail over to other regions. So we see a lot of different strategies from different customers.
Okay, so just touching on that regions aspect that you just mentioned. So, as let's say a potential AWS customer, I could say I want a server in Europe. I'm going to store some data in there, and then likewise do the same thing, but have a server in America and kind of piggyback. Is that kind of what you're saying, or is this totally different?
Yeah, exactly, and it's very common, especially for some of our managed solutions, that is the standard of what would happen when you deploy in AWS. So, for one example, with our relational database service or RDS, our recommendation for production is always to deploy what's called a multi availability zone or multi AZ deployment, and AWS will take care of that replication all for you, and it will have a warm instance standing by in a geographically separated availability zone, or in layman speak, a different data center, so that should something happen to that data center, either via network connection or even a actual natural disaster, you're able to fail over, and AWS will automatically take care of promoting that other database to your production so that you'll experience as minimal downtime as possible.
Okay, that's good then. And is it true that AWS is literally the same as a server platform that Amazon uses in its own products and services?
Yeah, absolutely, and that's how AWS was born. Was just wanting to share a lot of compute resources through some of our internal teams. That's obviously grown to massive proportions today, and all of our internal teams use AWS. In fact, on my own team, we have a couple folks that are dedicated to helping our own teams optimize on their spend using their own internal services. And it's really cool. There's a lot of public facing documentation around how some of our teams have moved all of their various different workloads to different AWS services. I think in the last year, we finally got off of all of our licensed databases and moved to open source databases. And that was something that was very public, and a use case that we very frequently point to when talking with our own customers, talking about some of the advantages, just showing that we use it ourselves, and obviously it's worked very well for Amazon.
Okay, I mean, yeah, I can imagine because I remember when AWS came out, and it was the thing that I was hearing. You're using Amazon's servers, not servers that they've just whipped up and you can use, and they're just not as good, but it's still the exact ones that they use. So in terms of like a server kind of database perspective, you have what Amazon has. As long as you can, let's say, do the rest of the technical side, you can kind of match them in terms of what your website or your platform is capable of. So is AWS and Amazon's own services servers physically separate? And why mean by that is if, let's say, there's a huge spike in Amazon's products and services, the amount of customers that's going on, maybe it's temporary because of Christmas or Black Friday or something. Would they divert resources from customers, or are they just physically separate but they're effectively the same in terms of the technological design?
They are still using all the same data centers, although everything is completely separate from a data segregation perspective. So security is obviously paramount for us, and that's one thing that we make sure is very important. Um, when it comes to capacity, that's something that we have teams that very closely monitor those situations. And obviously, we're doing a lot of predicting for our own usages. You can imagine Black Friday and some of the holiday periods, Prime Day. Those are when we're looking at huge potential spikes on Amazon. We also run things like Amazon Prime, and the streaming services there. So there's a lot of capacity, dedication, and prediction that goes on. When it comes to customers, though, we always are ensuring that there's plenty of capacity, and that's why we do so much planning. And with some of our larger customers, we do a lot of planning with them and our capacity teams to ensure that we're meeting their demands. So that's something that obviously is really important when you are running in the cloud, having that capacity, and we promote the same practices with our customers as well. So, especially in the media world, for myself, have talked with a lot of the larger streaming platforms about new shows that are released or events like the Super Bowl. And there's constant planning that goes up leading into that to ensure that there will be no disruption. Because obviously, that's not something that the end users are going to want. And there's always a lot of eyes when it comes to those big events.
Yeah, I mean that's fair enough because that's the last thing that Amazon wants is a scandal like that. That what the media's going to say. The competitors are on Amazon services because you got Amazon Prime Video. Obviously I'm using Netflix, but you got Netflix as a big example. And the last thing Amazon wants is for them to have in the media that okay they've been lowering the resources available to Netflix just to get more users during some period where they released Lord of the Rings, for example. So yeah,
Yeah.
that makes sense. So how much of the overall Amazon resources, the vast resources they have, goes into AWS? Because over the last 5 to 10 years, I've seen a huge, emphasis on AWS from Amazon. So how much of the overall resources goes into AWS?
That's a great question. I honestly have no idea, but I do know Amazon is one of AWS's biggest customers. So when it comes to just overall usage, and that's again something that is very great about cloud, is that usage and consumption can vastly change over time. You were mentioning use cases of some of those big spikes. If you're looking at the on-prem world, you have to provision for that. And so the great part about being in the cloud is that we've already built out the scale and the network in order to have and bake in those levels of scaling in and out. So on a day like Prime Day or Black Friday, Amazon, along with other retailers, are probably consuming a much higher proportion of some of those resources than on an average day. And that's something that we obviously plan for and are building the AWS backbone for. But there are other things. I mentioned the Super Bowl earlier, where so much of our resources then are going to be dedicated for streaming, other media outlets that are putting out content and things like that. It can really change day over day, hour over hour, what might be consuming a lot of resources on AWS.
Okay. So I've heard before that Amazon is frugal. How frugal is Amazon internally?
It's if you've heard of the leadership principles, it's one of, I believe now we have 13 leadership principles, and it's taken very seriously. And I think that the team I mentioned that I'm on, looking at cost optimization, is a great example of that, because we're a team of about 40 plus that are dedicated to cutting costs. And I guess this reflects a little bit on one of our other leadership principles, not to dig into the Amazon Kool-Aid too much, but talking about our customer obsession. We have this team that's entirely dedicated to what seems like cutting revenue and helping customers save money. Obviously, our goal is to help people use AWS more efficiently with the hope that they bring more of their workloads onto AWS because it makes the value proposition much better. It makes their applications run better, and they get more bang for their buck. Um, so when it comes to frugality, it certainly is reflected in a lot of different type of things that we do, and even some of the teams, like I'd consider my own team.
Okay. So does Amazon still have the two pizza team rule?
Yeah, it does. And so actually, I've been in my current role, the optimization architect role, for about a year and a half. But I spent my first 2 years at Amazon in our professional services group. Um, and that was when I was a little bit more on the ground with customers, hands on keyboard, working on actual implementation and development. And that's very frequently when we would use the two pizza team mechanisms when it comes to our development teams, trying to stay very lean, especially when it comes to rolling out some of those larger projects. How can you slice those up into more granular teams to help speed up the development? That's still very core to Amazon's principles.
Okay. And does Amazon still use doors as desks, or are those days long gone?
I've personally upgraded mine. I have a feeling that in the giant work from home shift, a lot of people have upgraded their desks as well. I think in some of the HQs in Seattle that they have some actual doors, kind of as odes to the door on desk. But I haven't seen them in person.
Yeah. I mean, I always found that strange just from the perspective that in the UK it's a lot cheaper to get a tabletop, especially if you just let's say go IKEA for example, or even other places, than to grab a door that has obviously the pre-cut hole in there. So again, I don't like in America are doors just super cheap or something?
Well, I think back in the day when Bezos was starting this up, I'm sure that there weren't as many IKEAs around.
Yeah, I guess
But
so.
yeah, I think it's more of a moniker for just being a builder, I think, and just making do with what you have.
Yeah.
Again, going back to our different leadership principles. So there's a lot of symbolism behind that, and I think that there's still um, a lot of different mention it in different types of Amazon onboarding and things like that.
Okay. And what is Amazon doing right to get its AWS platform to the size it's at? Because is it, am I right to say that it's bigger than Google Cloud overall?
Yeah, they are still the market leader. I think I've been looking at a Gartner report. It was about 34% of the market that AWS has. Um, I mean, the expansion of it is just something that is continually worked on. I think there's always new regions and new data centers that are being built. Most recently, I think, was Melbourne down in Australia. And then the next one that they have in previews is Jakarta in Indonesia. Um, so not only continually building out what we have existing, but looking to expand the footprint. Um, One of the other great parts about cloud is that you can get that global footprint immediately upon deploying. So you can deploy a server almost anywhere in the world from just wherever you're sitting at your desk. Um, and so it's something that our teams are constantly looking at, mostly because our customers are global customers. We're servicing customers all around the world that are looking to reach their own customers that are also around the world. And so us continuing to build out and try to predict where there's going to be more demand is really what helps Amazon grow. I also just mentioned some of the innovation in a lot of the services, trying to adapt and innovate where there's a lot of trends in the market. I think AI is very hot right now with ChatGPT and other AI services. And there's a ton of cloud native services and cloud native integrations that can be used for things like that. And it's some of those things that Amazon's always looking to iterate on um, for their customers as well as Amazon.
Okay. And I see you've got Amazon certifications. What's involved in getting an Amazon certification?
Yeah, I think they're really great to help really build a foundational knowledge. Um, Obviously, it doesn't replace hands-on knowledge, but I've really found that it's really great for learning a little bit more about how the services work, and also learning a little bit more about services that you may or may not have used in the past. Um, so when I started my cloud journey, this was many years ago. I was actually back at Accenture doing consulting. Um, a lot of that was just to learn about cloud, what was different about it, and some of those very elementary services. And then as I got more into cloud, it became diving into some of the more advanced certifications and learning a little bit more about how the services tick, how you can use them, and what makes each of them different from others. Because when you get to, especially some of the size of some of my customers, you are constantly comparing trade offs of AWS services, third party services that integrate with AWS. And there's very particular use cases when you build things out. Um, you look at databases and look at what is the best data structure for your data. Is it best used relational? Do you want to move to something more cloud native that might be a non-relational database, a graph database? There's been so much advancement in that space, and so the certifications are really great for that. As I mentioned, and just to reiterate, I think it doesn't replace a lot of the hands-on keyboard work, um, which can really be also great in doing those certifications, as it gives you a chance to experiment. But the certs themselves are great ways to just learn cloud, especially if you're looking to dip your toe in for the first time. That cloud practitioner certification is a really great 100 level introduction to AWS.
Okay, and how much weight does an Amazon certification have to get a job at Amazon if you don't, if you don't already work there, and also other companies as well? Like, how beneficial is it to gain a job just outside of the knowledge aspect?
I would say some. It definitely helps to get your foot in the door. Um, and I think, especially for some of our non technical roles, if you look at folks in our sales org or business development org, it may not even be required that you have a certification to get a role at Amazon. I think more it's about an understanding of the products and services. Certainly for some of the more technical roles, you would expect them to at least have the solution architect associate. But then again, it's I think how can you translate that to ability to create solutions, be hands on keyboard, and then also sell designs as well. Because so much of our jobs are working with customers and talking with them as well. So, can you actually speak about advantages, disadvantages of certain solutions, as well as products?
Okay, and what does Amazon internally, because Amazon is so big and there's so many people involved, and it's so easy for, let's say, somebody to go rogue or a team to go rogue. How does Amazon prevent somebody within the company making a decision that says, okay, we've got competitors or companies that could be competitors using AWS, we could effectively take them down with a flick of a switch? Like, what does Amazon do to prevent that from happening?
Well, I think at its core level, obviously we have a lot of the same mechanisms that a lot of other companies will have when deciding their roadmap. I think one of the things that is unique at Amazon is our emphasis around writing,
Mm-hmm.
especially when it comes to creation of product strategy or team strategy. And those are actually great ways to, I think, really conceptualize the direction that you're going. Um, and those are often shared amongst teams. Teams are crafting them constantly, and so when it comes to especially dictating the strategy of an organization this large, there are so many docs that are consolidated and help to ensure that the organization is moving cohesively in a single direction, and you'll have docs roll up to the more senior level, to really help with that. Um, I think as well, just to mention it from my own perspective of how that influences me. My team just went through our writing process, and when you write things down, it just causes you to think of it in such a different manner, and I think conceptualize it a lot more, especially in the Amazon writing style that things need to be so brief and so concise. You have to really think about what's important and what's not. So it is something that I've found super interesting and has been really been helpful for me, especially in the last year as my team's embraced it a lot more, in dictating our own roadmap and what's important to our team.
Okay. And what's it, like working at Amazon, and how does it compare to Accenture?
It's certainly a beast, and I think one of the most interesting things about working at Amazon is the breadth of the company. There's so many things under the Amazon umbrella between Whole Foods, Kindle, Prime, the retail business, so many other different parts. So there's so much about the business that I don't even know about. It's great to hear from some of the other friends that I know that work at Amazon in other areas and just hear how it's different, hear some similarities. And so it's certainly uh, very fun working at a company that large, and we're certainly in the news a lot, so lots to tune my eye or tune my ears into, when it comes to that. Um, but certainly at Amazon, there's a great culture of just builders here. Um, I remember in some of my first months at Amazon, I feeling like the dumbest person in the room a lot of the time, and I think that mirrors a lot of people's experience. Um, Also, quite interesting just to see how much people at Amazon lean into a lot of the Amazonian principles, whether it be some of the leadership principles I mentioned earlier, whether it be mechanisms like writing docs that I mentioned earlier. There really is a lot of buy-in to what those do. And obviously, they've been foundational in the earlier years of Amazon and how it's grown. Um, and again, it can be kind of Kool-Aid feeling sometimes when you've got these leadership principles that everyone's always referring to. But obviously, that happens because it works. And it does give a good guiding light, especially in some of my earlier months and years at Amazon, and also going through things like promotion processes. What are things that are important that we need to do in our day to day to make sure that we're on the right path? And so I really like that aspect of Amazon. And it really does stay true to how Amazon grew in its original days. And you can kind of see that it's very similar to like the door on desk analogy that's still used today.
Okay. And what made you leave Accenture for Amazon? Because Accenture's not a small company, one of the largest
No.
consulting companies in the world. Different, because I don't know if you know, I worked at Accenture as well for a year, just over a decade ago. So they're very, very corporate. Mm, what made you leave that for Amazon?
Yeah. It was funny when you were asking me about the differences. I was like, well, the size is actually very comparable.
Yeah.
You definitely feel like a fish in a large pond, in both of those. Um, when I was at Accenture, was kind of when the cloud was really starting to get big. This was I joined Accenture around 2014. And there was a lot of smart people in my office that were senior managers, managing directors that were attempting to push a lot of the younger new blood towards the cloud. And it was funny. It took me quite a few times of actually attempting to understand the cloud and what it was to really get a good grasp for it. But um, I eventually did really enjoy starting to get into the cloud. I got my first certification, the solution architect, when I was still over at Accenture. And that's kind of where my cloud journey started. Um, Actually, at the time when I had been doing all that studying, I was one of the only technical people on a group of strategy consultants, helping to consult for a telecom company. Um, and one of the managing directors at the time left and came over to AWS to help start their telecom consulting arm. And so it was really good timing for me because I had been kind of her technical right hand on that project, and she knew that I had gotten my certification. So the first layer of that was helping her to study for her interview, teaching her a little bit about AWS since she was more on the strategy side. And then once she was a little bit more established, she reached out and brought me over. Um, so that's kind of been my journey through the cloud. And really, once I got into AWS as a consultant at Accenture, obviously it was a goal to be able to work at Amazon, and was super excited to come over when I did.
Okay, fair enough. And I've got some, more fun generic questions, outside of, the Amazon and work stuff to, run through the. I would
Sure.
love asking, my guests these type of questions. Would you rather run a 10-person company or a 1,000-person company, and why?
Oh, very interesting question. I mean, I think for me, as someone that you've mentioned has been in some of these massive companies, I think that the small startup world is something that has been most intriguing to me. So I would probably lean towards 10 in that.
Mm,
And I think that most closely mirrors some of the more successful teams that I've been on. You mentioned the two pizza team at Amazon, very popular model for us. Um, I also just love in some of those small spaces the amount of responsibility that you can take on. And on both teams, I've been on Amazon. Both have started relatively small. Um, in my first role, I think I was the fifth person that eventually grew to well over 100 by the time I had left that team. And the team I'm on now, Optics, uh, it's grown a lot even in the last year and a half. It was probably about 20 or so when I joined, and is now about double of that size. Um, and so I love a little bit of that, entrepreneurship that you get on a small team where you're doing things that you may not necessarily have to do in a larger organization, but you're really doing it to keep the lights on and keep all the balls juggling. Um, and so for myself, in the media and entertainment space that I work in with my customers, it's really me and one other counterpart that are doing that. And so between the two of us, we really manage is look at it as managing a book of business, and we're constantly meeting to talk about how we can best keep up the relationships with our customers and keep our engagements going, which is a necessary part of that job. So definitely like some of the aspects of being smaller, and being able to wear many hats.
okay. And would you rather have $5 million up front or $500,000 a year for the rest of your life, and why?
I feel like that's a little bit of a math question. I mean, I'd hope that I would live longer than 10 years to be able to get more than breaking even there. And I also feel like I'd live pretty comfortably off of 500,000. So all math equations aside, I would even say 500,000 for the rest of my life.
Okay, so you'd rather have the 500,000 a year for the rest of your life. Fair enough.
I'm not good enough at the stock market to take 5 mil now and make something good of it.
Yeah, that's one of the like. 5 million sounds good, but when you're given the option, like if you're only given 5 million, then it's like you take that. But if you're given the option to have still a good amount every year, you could just still invest it, and you can mess up a couple of years, and it wouldn't matter.
Yeah.
I mean,
There's a reason I'm in tech and not in finance. So,
yeah, yeah, fair enough. Favorite board game?
favorite board game. Certainly been playing a lot of Catan recently. Um, Especially when the pandemic hit, I was still living with a couple of my friends here in New York, and we would spend so many of our evenings just passing time playing Catan. Um, so I've got to go with that one. It's tried and true.
Okay. Favorite video game?
Oh man, I haven't been much of a gamer since really some of my younger days. When we were growing up initially, my parents wouldn't let us have video games, and I think it wasn't really until high school that we managed to break them, and me and my brothers were pretty ecstatic. Um, I'll answer it in two ways. I think that my brothers and I we all love sports, so we loved the 2K series and also playing FIFA. and then a little bit more of like an actual gaming perspective. This is kind of an older one, but my brothers and I also love playing Ratchet and Clank on PlayStation.
Oh yeah, I remember those
That
games.
was a classic. Sometimes I want to go back and get my old PlayStation 2 just so I can play that one. It makes me miss it.
Okay, and I mean, I don't know how relevant the next question is. 'Cause you don't really play games often now, but is there any video games you're looking forward to, even if not to play, just to see what they're about?
Yeah, a bit tougher. The one thing I will say is that I know that everyone's talking about that Harry Potter game on PlayStation that looks pretty fun. Um, and I definitely have been someone that grew up on the books and watching the movies, so that would be a great one. Although I think that's already out. I don't think
Yeah,
that's
it came
upcoming.
out 2 weeks ago because I bought that for my wife, and she'd been playing it a lot. She loves it. I haven't played it yet, but I've
You gotta
seen
get the
what.
controller from her.
Say it again.
So you're gonna have to get the controller from her and try it
I
out for
mean,
me.
I am like she literally just went to play it now. Before I came on the podcast, so she does love the game. The bits that I've seen her play, it does look really good. You can tell they put a lot of effort into it, and it seems to have worked out for them because they had a lot of delays with that game, and when things keep getting delayed and delayed, and when they come out and they're just not good, just like all these delays and the product's not even good anyway.
Yeah, and like right now we've got everyone that grew up on Harry Potter that that was that was kind of our dreams growing up, and to see some of the improvements in gaming and streaming and some of those other technologies to see how realistic they are. Um, they've got the perfect audience that are waiting to play.
Oh yeah, yeah, for sure. I mean, I wouldn't mind some other franchises getting this sort of love as well. For like Lord of the Rings, for example, there have
Hmm.
been some amazing Lord of the Rings games, but to this level, I don't really think so. I would love some newer Star Wars games.
Oh yeah,
Oh,
big Star Wars guy.
yeah, big, huge Star Wars guy. I would love to get a Star Wars game that's more open world like this in the modern era. Because I know we've had Knights of the Old Republic back in the day, and then the online one, the Old Republic, and Star Wars, Galaxies as well before. But they're older now. I want something
Hmm.
more modern. The new control schemes. New technology with the PlayStation 5 controller, and just in general to get something new. Hopefully, the success of Hogwarts Legacy will get some of those other franchises to be like, okay, let's do this where it's open world and there's a lot to it and it's all single player. Because there's so many companies that are just doing everything multiplayer now, and you're just not really getting much single player games.
Yeah, definitely. I'll plus one you there for the Star Wars stuff. I mean,
Yeah,
even though I don't game as much, I'm always looking at those to see how cool some of the newer games look.
yeah. I mean, we got Star Wars Jedi Survivor that's coming out in a couple of months, so I'm excited for that. And I'm got high hopes for that one. Jedi Fallen Order was really good. The graphics were amazing on that, and obviously Jedi Survivor looks even better. Did you play any of the Star Wars video games back in the day?
Oh yeah, we had Knights of the Old Republic, a lot of Battlefront as well. We loved.
Yes, the OG
Um,
ones, one and
yeah,
two.
exactly. I think we had one and two back for the PlayStation 2. Would spend a lot of afternoons and nights playing that.
Cool. And okay, talking about Star Wars, what's your favorite movie?
Ooh, um, I mean, I think just growing up on them, uh, I like the first three a lot more than I think that most people give the credit to. Um, I like five a lot, and I like two a lot. Attack of the Clones. I kind of feel like it's a toss up between those.
Okay, so you like the ones that end on a negative note.
Apparently, yeah,
Yeah,
it's the suspense that keeps me going.
yeah, the middle ones. Yeah, for me, it's Return of the Jedi. Prequels I do love as well, 1, 2, and 3. But because my father was a huge, or he's is a huge Star Wars fan, and so I grew up watching episodes 4, 5, and 6 before episodes 1, 2, and 3 even came out.
Hmm.
And yeah, Return of the Jedi definitely is my favorite. And that space battle, it's still to this day it looks good. It still holds up. Obviously, yeah, for technically things could be improved a little bit, but overall, considering it was from what 83, it still definitely holds up.
Yeah,
There's
yeah, really
other
impressive.
movies from even later than that, and you're like, it doesn't look that good.
Yeah. No, those are timeless. And as you said, growing up on those, there's that nostalgia factor as well that makes you appreciate it even more.
Yeah, and what do you think of the Disney batch of Star Wars stuff in general, including the movies?
Uh, I wasn't as high on the movies, but some of those spin-offs have been great. I'm really pumped up for the new Mandalorian series coming out in a few weeks. Uh, been watching those, pretty religiously since they came out. Same with the Boba Fett series. I actually didn't see Andor, and someone yesterday was telling me that I need to watch that. So that might be going on to my watch list coming up here.
Yeah, Andor. I mean, I watched them all. Mando, really good. Boba Fett,
Yeah,
I thought it was decent. Not as good as Mandalorian, but it's still good.
yeah, with you
Andor, it
there.
was like it. The thing is, it's they're actually going into the further realms of Star Wars with Andor, and as a result, because you're not really seeing, I don't want to spoil it, but seeing typical Star Wars stuff, it it feels a bit like different. But yeah, it was good. And then you had did you watch Kenobi?
Yeah, I watched Kenobi as well. That was a good one as well.
Yeah, it was, especially the last 2 or 3 episodes. It
Yeah,
definitely picked up, and finally we're starting to see people use force powers the way they used to use them in the games.
yeah,
Because in the
yeah,
movies they've always been a bit weakened, but when you're seeing Darth Vader and Obi-Wan going at you, and Darth Vader just throwing the rocks, that he's throwing at him, and then Obi-Wan just throwing the rocks at Vader, it definitely felt like they were formidable, individuals. Because I always felt like the movies that they just felt like regular people with a lightsaber and a bit of force powers. They didn't feel like the way they spoke about the Jedi and the Sith, that when one of them comes onto the battlefield, like the whole tide just changes. And whereas in Kenobi, you you get that vibe. You get, okay, if somebody like Vader came onto the field, the baddies could be losing, but then it's totally game over for the other side, or vice versa.
yeah. I think you nailed it. With it's the most video game centric of the fight scenes, and which is great when you grow up growing playing some of those games, as you mentioned, because it was very similar to what you could do in some of those different video games.
Oh yeah, and especially seeing some of those cinematics for the Old Republic. Did you ever see those cinematics for the Old Republic game?
I don't think so. No.
Oh, I'll send you some links after the podcast. But do you remember the Old Republic game,
Yeah, yeah.
the online
I
one?
used to love those.
Yeah. So no, not Knights of the Old Republic, just the one, the Old Republic, the online one.
Yeah.
Did you play that one? It came after Knights of the Republic 1 and 2.
I'm not sure. I think one of my friends had a couple of them. I'm not sure which ones they were.
Yeah, I think you might be thinking of maybe the offline or RPGs. But either way, I'll send you some links. And when you see those cinematics, one, still look really good. But when you see the battle scenes in there, the fight scenes, you're just like, this is what I want in a movie. And you finally kind of get it with Kenobi. And I'm hoping as the newer movies and the TV shows come out, you do really, see these sort of fight sequences, because personally that's what I want to see from a Star Wars movie. I'm still waiting for the day where we have a Star Wars movie and there's like 100 Jedi versus 100 Sith, and it's or how is just breaking loose. We have not had that moment yet.
Yeah. Perfect. Send it my way. I didn't know that the podcast came with homework, but at least it
Yeah.
sounds fun.
Oh yeah, I'll definitely send that over. So Does money buy you happiness? I always love asking this question and seeing the response.
What were the choices?
I mean, does money buy you happiness?
Oh, um, I mean, I
And
think in
obviously,
some
why
regards,
as well.
certainly, yeah. I mean, what one funny quote that I was told once was that if money can't buy you happiness, you're shopping at the wrong stores, which I think sounds a little bit more too materialistic. Um, I mean, I think that at the end of the day, as much as fun as work can be, we're all doing this for the paycheck. And I think there are some areas of my life that are hobbies that are only hobbies because I wouldn't be able to earn as much money doing that. Um, but obviously, there's the you know less egocentric mantra that just having money is certainly not going to buy you happiness. So I think it's not as perfect of an answer, but goes a little bit both ways in my opinion. But I think definitely there's a lot that can come from happiness in terms of money.
Oh yeah, for sure. I think you got to get that, balance. I've seen people where that go their whole life and they go behind that sort of notion that money is the root of all evil and blah blah blah. Money doesn't make you happy, and they go behind the notion so much that they don't make anything for themselves and their families suffer as a result. Instead of being like, you know what, I don't need to have millions, but if I have a bit more, my family can be a bit more comfortable, and I can get stuff done around the house, just basic stuff. So I feel like a lot of people go one way or the other. They either are money's the root of all evil, forget it, but still not realizing they're buying food with money, they're paying the rent on the mortgage with money, so they are still using it, or they go so crazy after money that the things that probably would make them very happy, like spending time with family, with friends, having hobbies, and all this sort of stuff, they kind of forsake it and don't concentrate on those areas, even though they've got more than enough and they could have an amazing life with just half of what they have. So getting the balance is very important. It's very difficult to see where to have that balance. It's something that I know I've struggled with over the last year or two, especially since I got married. Of when to enjoy myself and when to work and make sacrifices. But it's still something I'm trying to figure out.
Yeah. I think living in New York is a really great way of learning about some of those balances on the just aspect of needing money versus not needing money. In New York, there's obviously a ton of things that are super expensive and it can be, very pricey to live here. And sometimes I feel like I walk out the door and I've already spent over $100. Um, but then there are some of the great aspects of being here that are free, just going to the park, even just walking around through some of the neighborhoods, can bring me so much enjoyment. Walking outside with a cup of coffee in the morning. Um, and then there's what do you do with that money? There's can certainly be a lot of material things in New York, but some of the things, even just like going to a nice dinner with friends, can bring so much value. Some of the food that you get there can make you feel um, you know so great and just really appreciate what you're doing. So as you said, balanced everything.
Oh yeah, for sure. And what advice would you give to someone that's starting out in their career and they want to work at Amazon, they want to get into cloud, they want to do something what you're doing, because obviously you've done it, you're in the middle of it. What advice would you give to help accelerate that journey for them?
Yeah, I mean, there's certainly so many resources now that are really great, especially compared to when I was getting into cloud. I think just really developing that understanding. I think that a lot of people, when they think of development, it's a lot of web developer, application developer. The infrastructure side is maybe something that the average plebeian is not thinking about. So first just learning about that, and learning how the internet works, learning how infrastructure works for different companies. The certification path that you mentioned is a great path to maybe start with that. For AWS, it's the certified cloud practitioner. I know that for other clouds, there's a lot of other really great resources and other certs that are kind of that entry level. And as I mentioned earlier when we were talking about certifications, is really just playing around. Again, I know that all of the other clouds offer this as well, but AWS has a free tier where you can go and experiment for like a year, and they give you a lot of resources that are totally free to use. And so you can look up a lot of really cool projects, whether it just be building a basic website or a web server or other cool apps that you can build in the cloud. And that's really a way to get hands-on practice, and also learn about some of the skills that you need, whether it be Linux, whether it be programming, and then obviously cloud specific knowledge as well.
Okay. So, got another question. Because you're, you have a very client facing role, what mistakes do you commonly see people doing when they're doing a switch to cloud?
Um, Well, two, I think first is, and I alluded to this a little bit earlier, of there are a lot of cloud development principles that are converse to developing in the cloud, and that's really what my team focuses on. Um, I think storage is a really easy to understand example that I tell people when they don't understand my job. Um, like storage is something where if you had room to store something, typically you would just store it. You wouldn't pay any mind to it. Now in the cloud, you have a lot of different access tiers so that you can save money based on how frequently you will access something, how immediate you would need access to it once you request that. And so there's a lot of different ways that you can store data rather than just storing it on a disk. Um, and so uh, part of it is just understanding some of those cloud native principles. The other difficulty that, and I see this very often with my customers, and is the problem that we're always solving, is how do you get the visibility into that data, especially when you're looking at huge organizations where they have hundreds of teams, maybe thousands of applications. How are you, one, segregating between the costs of one application and another? And then how does a team know about the costs that are associated with their development work? Um, and so that's a huge part of the cost optimization process for us. And kind of like step zero when it comes to cost optimization is, can you even identify the costs, what it takes to run your business? And that business could be, based on your application, or what is your cost per user. There's so many different cool data sets that you can join on that with your cost if you do have ways of allocating it correctly. So that's usually step zero when it comes to talking with some of our customers.
Okay. And talking about costs, I've heard stories where somebody's gone on to a cloud platform like AWS or Google Cloud, they subscribe to it, and the next thing they look, the costs, they've ran up, a huge bill. Like, how does one use these services and manage the costs on cloud?
Yeah, I've seen so many horror stories that are similar to that. Um, I mean, I think that you obviously want to have a little bit of understanding what you're doing. And that's why I think going a little bit down that certification route first, so that you understand the breadth of services in that nature, and also understand the billing concepts behind them. That's another thing that maybe developers weren't as used to in the past. Are you paying for the number of hours a server runs? If you have scaling turned on, how are you doing that? Because these are some knobs that people used to be able to turn, and it doesn't really change their bottom line. And also, sometimes it still doesn't for developers if um, they're not allocating costs correctly, and the cost is just paid for by their company. If there's no way of seeing your own costs at the end of the day, that can also be very challenging. um, Clouds like AWS have a lot of solutions to kind of prevent that. such as billing alarms and budgets and things like that that you can implement. And very frequently, when you're going through a course or an introduction to AWS, that'll be one of the first things that people set up, especially if you're doing something that is going to be on the free tier. You can create an alarm that says, "Notify me if 1 cent is going to be charged to my credit card." And AWS will try to make sure that that's very transparent. Um, so not only learning a little bit about the services that you're using, but also learning about some of the billing constructs that I mentioned. And then also just to plug just some of the cost tooling that AWS has, make sure that you're looking at things like your bill and Cost Explorer so that you can actually understand that and see your usage.
Okay. I mean, yeah, definitely. You gotta, I've heard these horror stories as well. You've got to manage your costs. I mean, as a business in general, but when you are using software as a service where it can scale up in a good but also a bad way, you've got to, make sure that you do keep an eye on the bottom line. But it's also good to hear that Amazon does have some sort of systems in place that you can, configure. So if the costs maybe start to get out of control, you can get alerted or maybe have services stop or stop growing as a result of that. So in terms of questions, that's everything for me. Is there anything that you want to say before we start to wrap up, Rem?
Um, no, I mean, first of all, thanks for having me. As you mentioned, I think for anyone looking to get into the cloud, look at some of those resources. AWS training and certification has a lot, and I know there's a lot of other platforms. Also, a growing space that I'm very heavily involved in is FinOps and the FinOps roles, having to do with cost management and cloud financial management. I think it's a really cool growing space, and there's a lot of cool organizations that you can join to learn more about FinOps. I think that especially now, given where some of the economy is going in the last year, where people are being a lot more cost aware, that is a great space to get into, where you might be able to straddle the technical lens as well as leverage other experience, whether it be finance, strategy, or other roles. Just knowing how a business works, if you are looking to get into the cloud, and you can have a huge impact if you're the person that is in charge of helping to save money, make sure that you stay on budget, and it's certainly a growing space. So certainly urge people to check that out, and it's a really fun area that's growing.
Oh yeah, and what I'll do is after the podcast, for anyone that's listening, I'll get some useful resources and links off Rem. So put them in the description, and feel free to check them out for cloud and AWS, that sort of stuff. Because obviously coming from somebody that's actually working in the industry, working at Amazon, is a lot better and a lot more useful than somebody that's never been there, done it, but trying to teach it and provide useful resources, because frankly Remo know better than somebody that's not there. So yeah, just thanks for coming on, Rem, and it was a great podcast. And just again, thank you very much.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Thank you. Bye everyone.